Welcome back. Last episode, we met the indefinite integral, the collection of all antiderivatives of a function, written as the integral of f of x dx equals capital F of x plus c, a family of functions, not a number. Today we meet a completely different object that uses the same symbol, and it is a number. The definite integral, the signed area between the graph of y equals f of x and the x-axis, from x equals a to x equals b. Same integral sign, two little tick marks added, a on the bottom, b on top, and what falls out is no longer a family but a single real number. We're going to build that number from scratch. Rectangles under the curve sum their areas, shrink the width to 0, take the limit. That construction is the Riemann sum, and its limit is the definite integral. We'll work out which functions admit such a limit. That's the notion of Riemann integrability. List the properties you'll lean on forever, work 2 examples by hand cold, and finish with the history. Archimedes doing it geometrically in the 3rd century BC, Cauchy putting it on modern footing in the 1820s, and Riemann in his habilitation thesis of 1854 giving the definition we still use. Here's the question that motivates the whole definite integral. Take a continuous function f on a closed interval from a to b. Suppose, for now, that f is positive everywhere. Its graph sits above the x-axis. What is the area of the region bounded above by the curve, below by the x-axis, and on the sides by the vertical lines x equals a and x equals b? For some functions, the answer is geometry. If f is a constant, the region is a rectangle. Height times width. Done. If f is linear, it's a trapezoid. Average of the 2 parallel sides times width. For any other shape of f, you're stuck. Classical geometry has no formula for the area under a parabola, much less a sine curve. You need a genuinely new idea. That idea is to approximate the complicated region by something we already know how to measure, a stack of rectangles, and then take a limit. Here is the construction. Start by chopping the interval from a to b into n smaller pieces. Pick n-1 cutting points strictly between a and b, and label everything x0, x1, x2, all the way up to xn, with x0 equals a on the left end and xn equals b on the right. That collection of points is called a partition of the interval. The width of the ith piece is delta x sub I, defined as x sub I minus x sub I minus 1. Now in each piece, pick one point, call it x sub I star, anywhere inside the ith subinterval. That's the sample point. Build a rectangle whose base is the ith subinterval, and whose height is the value of f at the sample point. The area of that rectangle is f of x sub I star times delta x sub I. Add up the areas of all n rectangles. That sum, the sum from I equals 1 to n of f of x sub I star times delta x sub I, is an approximation to the area under the curve. It's not exact. The tops of the rectangles don't follow the curve perfectly, but it's close, and it will get closer as the rectangles get thinner. Here is the picture. The blue curve is f. The orange rectangles cover the region under it. Each rectangle's base sits on one piece of the partition. Each rectangle's height is the value of f at the sample point. In this picture, I picked the right endpoint of each subinterval, but I could have picked the left endpoint, the midpoint, or really any point inside. Notice what's happening at the tops. Where f is rising, the rectangle pokes above the curve a little, and we've slightly overshot the true area. Where f is falling, the rectangle sits below the curve, and we've undershot. Both kinds of error are bounded by how much f changes across a single subinterval, and that change can be made small by making the subinterval narrow. The whole strategy of integral calculus from this point on is, make the rectangles narrow enough that both kinds of error vanish in the limit. Quick aside on which sample point to pick. 3 standard choices. The left endpoint, take x sub I star equal to x sub I minus 1, the left edge of the subinterval. The right endpoint, take x sub I star equal to x sub I, the right edge. And the midpoint, take x sub I star to be the average of the 2 endpoints. For any fixed n, these 3 give you 3 different numbers. If f is increasing, the left endpoint sum systematically undershoots, and the right endpoint sum systematically overshoots. For a decreasing f, it's reversed. The midpoint sum sits between them and tends to do better than either, because the over and undershoot errors largely cancel within each rectangle. But, and this is the important point, all 3 choices give the same answer in the limit as long as f is well behaved. That's not obvious. It's part of what we'll demand of an integrable function, that the limit doesn't depend on which sample points you picked. Time to give the construction its formal name. A Riemann sum is what you just built. The sum from I equals 1 to n of f of x sub I star times delta x sub I. It depends on 3 things, the function f, the partition capital P, and the choice of sample points x sub I star. Change any of those and you change the sum. One more piece of vocabulary we'll need constantly. The mesh of a partition, also called the norm of the partition, is the width of the widest subinterval in the partition. So the mesh is the largest delta x sub I. Saying the mesh is small is saying every subinterval is small. It is not the same as saying n is large. You can have a partition with 1,000 pieces, n equals 1,000, where almost all pieces are tiny, but one piece is a full quarter of the interval, and then the mesh is big and the approximation is lousy. The mesh is what controls the approximation, not the number of pieces. For equally spaced partitions, of course, the mesh is just b minus a over n, and shrinking the mesh and growing n are the same move. Most of the time, that's the only case you'll meet. Here is the central definition of the episode. The definite integral of f from a to b, written as the integral from a to b of f of x dx, is defined as the limit of Riemann sums as the mesh of the partition goes to 0, provided the limit exists and provided it doesn't depend on which partitions you used or which sample points you picked along the way. Both conditions are doing real work. If you can get different limiting values by choosing partitions or sample points differently, then f does not have a well-defined integral over the interval from a to b, and we say f is not Riemann integrable on the interval. When the limit does exist and is the same no matter how you set things up, the function is called Riemann integrable, and the common limiting value is the integral. Notice the notation. Same elongated s that Leibniz gave us in the indefinite case, same dx at the end. The new ingredients are the two little numbers a and b, written on the bottom and top of the integral sign. They are the limits of integration, and they make this object a number rather than a family of functions. Which functions are integrable? Two enormous classes. First, every continuous function on a closed bounded interval is Riemann integrable. That's a theorem you'll see proved in any real analysis course, and it's the workhorse. Almost every function you'll meet in this playlist falls into this class. Second, every bounded function that is continuous except at finitely many points is also integrable. So a step function with 3 jumps in the interval from a to b, or a function with a removable discontinuity in the middle, is fine. You can break the integral up into pieces where f is continuous, integrate each piece, and add. There are pathological functions that aren't Riemann integrable. The cleanest example is the Dirichlet function on the unit interval. It's 1 when x is rational, 0 when x is irrational. Every subinterval, no matter how tiny, contains both rationals and irrationals. So if you pick rational sample points everywhere, the Riemann sum is 1. If you pick irrational sample points, the Riemann sum is 0. The limit depends on the choice of sample points, so the integral doesn't exist in the Riemann sense. There is a sharper theorem due to Lebesgue. A bounded function is Riemann integrable on the interval from a to b if and only if its set of discontinuities has measure 0. That requires real analysis to even state precisely, so park it. For our purposes, continuous is integrable, bounded with finitely many jumps is integrable, Dirichlet is the boogeyman. Properties. 3 you'll use constantly plus 2 conventions. First, linearity. The integral of c times f plus g is c times the integral of f plus the integral of g. Constants pull out, some split. Same story as the indefinite integral last episode, because the Riemann sum itself is linear and limits preserve linearity. Second, additivity over intervals. If you integrate from a to b and you have a point c in between, you can split the integral at c. Integral from a to c plus integral from c to b equals integral from a to b. Geometrically obvious, chopping the region with a vertical cut at c gives 2 pieces whose areas add to the whole. Third, comparison. If f is less than or equal to g pointwise on the interval from a to b, then the integral of f is at most the integral of g. Bigger function, bigger area. As a corollary, if f is greater than or equal to 0, its integral is non-negative, and the absolute value of the integral of f is less than or equal to the integral of the absolute value of f. Useful estimate tools, and 2 conventions. If you swap the limits, integrate from b down to a instead of a up to b, you flip the sign. And if the limits are equal, the integral is 0, because you're asking for the area of a region of width 0. Those 2 conventions make the additivity rule work for c outside the interval from a to b as well, which is sometimes handy. First worked example. Compute the integral of x squared from 0 to 2, straight from the definition. No antiderivatives. We don't have a theorem yet that lets us use them on definite integrals. We're going to grind out the Riemann sum and take its limit. Setup. Chop the interval from 0 to 2 into n equal pieces. Each piece has width delta x equals 2 over n. The partition points are x0 equals 0, x1 equals 2 over n, x2 equals 4 over n. In general, x sub I equals 2i over n. For sample points, take right endpoints. X sub I star equals x sub I equals 2i over n. The Riemann sum is the sum from I equals 1 to n of quantity 2i over n squared times 2 over n. Pull the constants out of the sum. Quantity 2i over n squared is 4i squared over n squared. Times 2 over n is 8i squared over n cubed. The 8 over n cubed is constant in I, so it factors out, leaving 8 over n cubed times the sum of I squared from I equals 1 to n. and that sum has a famous closed form, due originally to the school of Pythagoras and proved by induction in every discrete math course, the sum from I equals 1 to n of I squared equals n times n plus 1 times 2n plus 1 all over 6. Substitute. The n in the numerator cancels one factor of n in the denominator, and we get 4 times n plus 1 times 2n plus 1 over 3n squared. Now the limit as n goes to infinity. Expand the top, n plus 1 times 2n plus 1 equals 2n squared plus 3n plus 1. Divide by n squared and you get 2 plus 3 over n plus 1 over n squared. As n goes to infinity, that tends to 2. So r sub n tends to 4 times 2 over 3, which is 8/3. The integral of x squared from 0 to 2 equals 8/3, computed by hand from the definition. Second worked example, a faster one. Compute the integral of x from 0 to 1, again from the definition. Partition into n equal pieces of width delta x equals 1 over n. Write endpoints x sub I equals I over n. Sample point in the ith piece is I over n, function value there is I over n, times width 1 over n gives I over n squared for the ith rectangle. Sum from I equals 1 to n, pull the 1 over n squared out, get 1 over n squared times the sum of I from 1 to n, and that sum is the most famous closed form in all of mathematics. Gauss's schoolboy trick, n times n plus 1 over 2, multiply through n plus 1 over 2n. Take the limit. As n goes to infinity, n plus 1 over 2n tends to 1/2. The integral of x from 0 to 1 is 1/2. Sanity check. The region under y equals x from x equals 0 to x equals 1 is a right triangle with one corner at the origin, base along the x-axis of length 1, and height 1 at the point 1, 1. Area is half base times height, which is 1/2. Same answer. Good, we just derived a triangle area by a limit of rectangles. That's the test of the definition. Anything elementary geometry can handle, the Riemann sum had better reproduce. It does. One more picture to nail down the intuition. On the left, the same curve approximated by 4 rectangles. You can see the staircase profile and the visible gaps between the rectangle tops and the curve. On the right, the same curve approximated by 16 rectangles. The staircase is much finer. The visible gaps are tiny. If I drew a third panel with n equals 100, you'd struggle to tell the rectangle outline from the curve at all. That is what taking the mesh to 0 looks like. The staircase converges to the curve. The total approximation error, the sum of the little gaps, converges to 0. And the Riemann sum, which is the total rectangle area, converges to a single number, which we call the area under the curve, and write as the integral from a to b of f of x dx. That number is what the definition was designed to produce. The definition is just the careful version of this picture. A brief history. 3 names spanning more than 2,000 years. Archimedes, in the 3rd century BC, working in Syracuse, used what we now call the method of exhaustion to compute the area of a parabolic segment. He inscribed a triangle in the segment, then inscribed smaller triangles in the 2 remaining sliver regions, then smaller triangles in those slivers, and summed the geometric series. The answer he got was 4/3 of the area of the original inscribed triangle, and the proof he gave, in the treatise Quadrature of the Parabola, is essentially the world's first Riemann sum limit argument, 2 millennia before anyone would write down delta x and a limit. It is genuinely modern in its logic. Archimedes could not take a limit in the modern sense, so he wrapped the argument in a clever double contradiction. Show the answer can't be less than 4/3, show it can't be more than 4/3, conclude it equals 4/3. The idea is exactly ours, the language is classical. Then, a long silence. The notation of calculus was invented in the 1680s by Newton and Leibniz, as we covered last episode, but neither of them gave a careful definition of the definite integral as a limit. That waited until the 1820s, when Augustin Louis Cauchy, lecturing at the École Polytechnique in Paris, defined the integral of a continuous function as the limit of sums on regular partitions with shrinking width. That was the first widely adopted rigorous definition. Cauchy required continuity and regular partitions. Both are restrictive. The final step was Bernhard Riemann's in his habilitation thesis of 1854. Über die Darstellbarkeit einer Funktion durch eine trigonometrische Reihe on the representation of a function by a trigonometric series. Buried in that thesis is the definition we just gave: arbitrary partitions, arbitrary sample points, limit as the mesh goes to 0, and a function is integrable when the limit exists and is independent of all the choices. Riemann's definition is one of those rare mathematical objects that hits the right level of generality on the first try. 170 years later, we still use it. Where we landed. To compute the area under a curve y equals f of x from a to b, chop the interval into n pieces, pick a sample point in each piece, build the rectangle with that height and that width, sum the areas. That's a Riemann sum. Shrink the mesh of the partition to 0. The limit, if it exists and is independent of how you chopped and sampled, is the definite integral. The integral from a to b of f of x dx, and the function is called Riemann integrable. Continuous functions are always integrable. So are bounded functions with finitely many jumps. Pathological things like the Dirichlet function aren't. The integral is linear, additive over intervals, and respects point-wise comparisons of functions. We worked 2 examples by hand. The integral from 0 to 2 of x squared equals 8/3 via the sum of squares formula, and the integral from 0 to 1 of x equals 1/2 via Gauss's trick, sanity checked against the triangle area. And the history, Archimedes did it for the parabola 2,300 years ago using the method of exhaustion. Cauchy in the 1820s gave the first modern, rigorous definition. And Riemann in 1854 gave the definition we still use. Now look at where we are. Last episode, the integral was a family of functions. The integral of f of x dx equals capital F of x plus c. This episode, the integral is a single number, the integral from a to b of f of x dx. 2 very different objects, same symbol. The miracle, the next episode, is that they are intimately connected. The number you get from the Riemann sum limit is exactly capital F of b minus capital F of a, where capital F is any antiderivative of f. Areas under curves and antiderivatives of functions are the same problem viewed from 2 angles. That is the fundamental theorem of calculus, and it is what we prove next. Episode 3, the fundamental theorem of calculus. See you there. We have 1/2 of integral calculus, the indefinite integral, and now the other half, the definite integral. 2 completely different objects. One is a family of functions, the other is a single number built from a limit of sums of rectangles. They have nothing to do with each other on the face of it. The miracle is that they have everything to do with each other. Next episode, we prove the fundamental theorem of calculus, the single equation that says antidifferentiation and area finding are the same problem in disguise. If you want to see the bridge get built, subscribe. If you got something out of this, please like the video, drop a comment with what clicked for you, or what didn't, and subscribe for more educational videos. Every like, comment, and share helps push this work to more learners, which is what this channel is really about. Thanks for watching, see you in the next one.